Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for January 24th, 2025. I'm Benji Fisher moderating and sharing my screen. And also here are Ralph Kohler and Simo Helston. We are going to continue the discussion we've had for the last couple of meetings. The issue is refined field descriptions. The issue number is 3370326. And just briefly for the sake of the recording, if you go to structure, content types, manage fields, create a new field, and what's a good one to look at? Number is the one we talked about last week. It is these descriptions distinguishing between the integer field, the decimal field, and the float field in this case. It's these descriptions that we've been discussing. There's a link on the issue to this spreadsheet that Ralph started. And I think if, am I on the right tab? The field type options. So I think this is where we've been doing most of the work. I think the first column shows the same text that's in those fields. So for example, number without decimals, for example, 1, 2, 3. And that is indeed the text we see there currently. And the third column, column C, is where we've been putting in our recommendations. Anything more to say before we dive into the next set of descriptions?
Just one point I might want to add that we should mind. Could you switch to your browser quickly? There's one detail. I mean to the example page. Yep. Could you go on the back button? Oh yeah, up there. Yeah. Because there's one detail that is missing from a visual aspect, same as in the oral interface and the microcopy we are working on. It's basically at the moment you have no, and it's something we should discuss in the future as well, is maybe also add, because there's no way to distinguish which of those is basically a group and which is an actual field type. Because basically plain text is a group, formatted text is a group, numbers is a group, reference is a group, media is a field type, while file upload is again a group, selection is a group, datetime is a group, Boolean, email, and link again are field types. And having some way, some situational awareness would be good. And at the same time, for screen reader users, it would have to be communicated in some way in the microcopy we are working on right now as well, from my point of view.
Yeah, this is something we've noticed before. And for the sake of the recording, I'll go through one of these. Boolean is the one I usually choose. There are actually no field settings there. Maybe link is slightly better example.
It's the same.
Oh. And yeah, that seems like an inconsistency to me. I don't like it. In the past, we've suggested creating a default group and putting these singleton fields under it. We got a lot of pushback on that idea. And I agree that it's confusing, and perhaps you're suggesting that we just have some sort of indication of whether it's a group or not, is would get less pushback than the idea of a default group. But I do think it's out of scope for the current issue.
Yep.
There's also a suggestion to allow fields to be under multiple different selections. So for selection list and text and formatted text, so they kind of are or some other things they are slightly overlapping, but that's also not for this issue.
And there is actually already one, the media field is also available under reference on other. You have to put in something here. And then media is one of the options. So there is already one special snowflake case where something is allowed to be under two different groups.
Yeah. But there's also the issue on that page, moving the field label to the field settings page, so that the case of, for example, Boolean of that empty page would be obsolete as well.
Right. There are, yeah, several related issues, and let's focus on one at a time and talk about the text again.
Yeah, I just raised the point with the groups, just in the context of it would have to be reflected in the microcopy as well in some way, and therefore I mentioned it here to keep it in mind.
Okay. And in the last few minutes, Thomas Howell has joined us. Hi, Thomas. And I think you're familiar with the issue we've been discussing.
I am.
And so let's get back to the copy. We were a little bit rushed at the end of the meeting. We finished up the recommended text for numbers. I was sort of the proponent of having the examples do a lot of the work of differentiating between the options. But of course, I'm not always right. So this is your chance to say that that you want to change something from what we discussed last week. Go ahead, Ralph.
Just for consistency reasons, looking at the examples, the number float is missing an example for p or pi.
That was deliberate.
It was? Okay.
Yeah, Benji wanted them to be different rather than having pi in each place.
Okay. I couldn't remember anymore.
Yeah, it really doesn't serve to show the difference between floats and decimals. And I think putting in Avogadro's number here
True. Okay.
does a better job of that.
I remember now.
Well, oh, now we can get to reference, which in my opinion is the one that needs the most help. Because if we choose reference, we've been through this already, we get to this screen where they all have the same description text, doesn't disambiguate at all, just an entity field containing an entity reference. And I wonder, I guess the first question is, should we follow the principle that less is more? If the description text doesn't help, then we shouldn't have it. Do we need any additional? And Ralph, you got your hand up first, but I think you've already had something to say, so let's let Thomas have the first word here.
This absolutely should have something more than the same exact sentence, in my opinion. I think as a user, and I have some comments about some of the other fields from the previous page later, but I would point out in this copy here that taxonomy terms in simpler websites are often similar to or are the same as, in some way, tags. Because I know for the longest time, when I dealt with customers, they used the taxonomy terms to tag their content. And many people don't know what taxonomy means, but they do know what a tag is. I'm not suggesting we change taxonomy term to tag or something like that, only that we find a way to link those concepts because it might help give context to how they could use this field. And I think these instructions should help people understand how to use each of these things. That's how you differentiate in a way that is useful to people of various technical levels.
Okay, and in particular, you don't like the idea of simply removing the text. You want to replace it with something better.
Yes, I do not like removing the text, and I do not like, because I think we can be more specific. It does not need to be a paragraph, but on one of the other examples you showed, there was more text to explain the thing we were looking at. This is helper text from my perspective on each of these 4 options.
Okay, Seema, go ahead.
I think for all of these, the users should be noted that the referenced, I would say, category. I think we could say bundle, but nobody would understand. Like the target of the reference, like the things that are going to be referenced, they need to be set up already. So unlike any other field or most other fields, they can't just you can't just start adding content, even if you can create new terms to a certain vocabulary or content type on the form. And I think the other selection, I think it includes also taxonomy terms and content and user, so it's not so much other but any.
Okay, so you think an important thing, not distinguishing between the options, but an important thing about the reference field is that when you're using it, when you're editing a piece of content and you want to choose a taxonomy term or a node reference, that term or node has to exist already.
Yeah.
Is this the right page for it, or should
Actually, users, like there are always users, but there might not be vocabularies on a site. So there is a kind of there wouldn't be anything that could be referenced. But that would be maybe on the field settings page, actually.
Okay. And Thomas, you wanted to reply to something Seema said?
I think that what Simo said pointed out on that next page, um, that we could actually pull the entity reference field containing an entity reference into helper text that included an explanation that all or most or whatever it is, like these things need to pre-exist, but you could put helper text because anything that is the same in all 4 fields, in my mind, should have been extracted anyway and put into helper text rather than put within the confines of the button itself. And I would assume it would create less fatigue for someone using a screen reader, but that is an assumption on my part. I think that if I had a screen reader, I could imagine having to hear it 4 times wouldn't provide added value.
Yeah, that's certainly having the same text in 4 places. No one thinks that's a good idea. Go ahead, Ralph.
Just one remark, because initially I've suggested to actually remove that entire page and the different options and simply have a field type on the previous page that directly leads to the reference page. But yeah, Thomas's point is a good one. So I think having the usage examples where, for example, taxonomy term is useful or where content and so forth might have a value. And just one thought, either on the help text on here in regards of CMOS point would be an option, like Thomas said, if I understood correctly, or another option might be to adjust the description on the previous page for the entire reference group, noting that basically another field to reference has to exist first.
Yeah, I think that these are typically pretty short descriptions, and I think it would be very difficult to get that information into something here and not make it sort of just much longer than all of the others.
The current suggestion was reference a content or configuration entity. The one we came up and agreed on when we discussed the first step a few months back. In the other sheet on step 1.
Field type descriptions, I see.
And current draft reference row 16.
There we go.
And it's reference a content or configuration entity.
So that is proposed text to replace this.
Yep. But yeah, probably too less space available there for adding the additional information.
Right. And thinking about the user path, we sort of have to trade off. We don't want people to go many steps down a process and then have to back up. And so that argues for putting the information on this page. On the other hand, the length of the text argues for putting it on this page.
Yeah.
And then there is just one click to get back if you've gone that far, which is better than if you are two steps further down the process when you get that information. So to distinguish between these, one of the things I'd like to get into the text is technically what we refer to as the bundle. The bundle is the generic term that we use on the back end, but we never use that on the front end. So for taxonomy term, we want to mention vocabulary. Content is, of course, the terribly overloaded word, but I guess we have to refer to nodes as content. User, there are no bundles of the user content type. There's just one type of user entity. And other, and then we of course want to avoid the word entity in user-facing text. Although obviously that hasn't been followed here. I guess we do call it reference rather than entity reference. In the back end, we would call it an entity reference. So I guess we want two things. We want some description text for the page as a whole. And we're suggesting that we include the information that you need to, well, first you need to create the vocabulary or the content type before you can create the reference fields to it. And second, that when you're editing content, you have to have the thing you're referencing before you can make a reference to it. Go ahead, Ralph.
2 questions. First, in regards of your suggestion with bundle, what would be the benefit to provide a touch point for the user with the concept of a bundle in here. And the other question is, at the moment, there are only 3 options: content, taxonomy term, and user. And if we are basically providing some sort of best where to use each of those, in which context to use each of those, would it make sense to add more? Because if you go to the field settings page of one of them, of those options, and you need the label, yeah. And go on the select element, then there are many, many more. And I wonder at least to add, for example, content block there as an option in the step before. Because for those, it would be definitely helpful to have where to use those, some explanation, and also the difference with block. There are many options. But such an wastebasket taxonomy term like other, I am always hesitant to use.
So basically, you think that 1 or 2 more examples would help get the idea across?
Yeah, also get the idea across, but also provide some guidance where to use those and to provide some more options. Because otherwise, if you just have other, then the people have basically, in particular, people new to Drupal, then exploring that select element ideally, and then they have no idea. They have content block and they have block type and so forth, and it's challenging. And there's also no distinguishing between a content entity and a configuration entity in the step before, with the available 4 field types available.
Have any of you ever used an entity reference to a configuration entity? I don't think I ever have.
No.
Um, and of all of these, like I can't think of a use case for making a reference to a URL alias or a shortcut link. Media is one option, and file is another. Of course, we already have ways to get to those. Custom menu link, content moderation state. I kind of think that content block is the only one that is sort of useful. And if we add, and then of course contributed modules can add their own types to the to the group, and then there would be more things here. But if we could get the web form, for example, thank you. If we could get the 90% use case that people never have to use other, then I think that would be a good thing. And most of those are just extremely rare in my experience. Simo, you've been patient. Go ahead.
So basically, other is the only option we have here, because selecting other behaves it's exactly the same as selecting content. So the other ones only pre-select that one option, but the form is the same. So
Right.
basically, we only have option, and then we have selections that preset that one select. And but I noticed that on a site under development, there is also like there with the paragraphs, I think, or something like there is other revisions. So there is other and other in parentheses revisions, and that's it. And that the revisions is something that has different content in the select list.
So I'm guessing that that's a site using paragraphs, and so it has the entity reference revisions module.
Yeah.
Um,
So entity reference revisions is something that creates a different kind of form.
yes.
So it doesn't have the same options to select, but all the core versions, they all have they are just the same field, but where you like arrive pre-selecting the like the type of reference.
Right. Technically the only thing that choosing a different option on this page does is pre-select something from this select list, and the select list is always present no matter which option you choose. I seem to have gotten my browser
Basically,
confused.
if we like tell the user what those options do, then they should just state that they pre-select the item to the type of item to reference, and then give some advice on what to do with taxonomy references, what to do with content references.
I'm not sure that we do have to tell them um, that the only effect of choosing one or the other is this pre-select. I think it's more important to give them guidance on which one they want to use. Um,
But I think something should be done with that in relation to that select, because I think it's an unnecessary chance to make an error if the user either on purpose or accidentally changes that. So
oh, so
somebody believes it's creating a user reference, and their cat steps on the keyboard, and then they are creating a reference field for content or something like that.
okay, I'm going to say that that's a suggestion that's out of scope.
Mm.
It could be that we could hide the select list if they've chosen taxonomy term or content or user, then hide that. Um, and yes, that would prevent our cats from causing some problems. And it would make
Mm. I'm thinking another solution would be because it only affects this form, like the content on this form. So we could have some kind of a list on this form, like well, no, yeah, that's not an idea that's ready to be discussed anyways.
yeah, I think the existence of this page is just one solution to the fact that a select list doesn't give you enough room to explain the difference between the options. But um, I think that's still out of scope for the current issue, and I'd like to discuss the text on this field on this page. Ralph, go ahead.
Um, I still think Simo definitely has a point in regards of educate the user or make it more explicit. What is the consequence of each of the choices, and communicating in some way that basically, yeah, with content, for example, content option under content entity is selected, and for user, the user entity. Um, but that would be, yeah, I'm not sure if it's really necessary or if we could do it either in a help text as well, or solve it indirectly by changing that term other and also the description there, that you basically there communicate. Those are the others are the air quotes presets with a shortcut that makes some pre-selection, while with other it's completely up to you. Something like that.
So we're half an hour into the meeting and we still haven't proposed any text for this page. So what do we have to do to actually make forward progress on these recommendations? Thomas?
I mean, from my perspective, if you want to talk about the text itself, where it says an entity field containing an entity reference, I would say, and I know we don't want repetitive text, so I think it's hard for us to figure out what to put in the button if we haven't decided, and it doesn't sound to me like we've made a definitive decision on if there should be helper text. Because if I were to say taxonomy term out of a hat, I'd say something like a tag that you can point to. Like you could replace it with something, but then everything like content becomes something blah 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 that you can point to. User is a website user that you can point to, and I feel like to solve the question of what to put into the buttons, we have to either exclude, and it sounds like I'm interpreting, and I think I'm probably wrong, but I'm interpreting what you're saying as resistance to putting common text above these buttons. But for me to solve the text in the buttons, I need to get the common text above them. And we need that definition on this page, for me at least, to understand what we're doing. And I would concur, I think Ralph mentioned something around other. I've been thinking for the past 15 minutes that I hate the term other because it shouldn't be inclusive of the three other terms or any other terms we put here and not be other. Like it's very confusing to me. It would be all options or select from full list or others. Everything about this page is really frustrating and highly technical, and it doesn't seem very user friendly. For me to solve it, it has to be broken down into smaller steps.
Okay, so I never meant to suggest that we should not have helper text that applies to the whole page. And also in the chat, Simo and Ralph are also discussing the other term. Simo suggests any, since it doesn't exclude the other options. Ralph suggests custom. Um, so one suggestion here, let me just that's a place to start. Choose from all avail. This is kind of long, and we might want to trim it later. Choose from all available options on the next screen. And then if we don't like other, we can make it any, for example. So would that be a step in the right direction? Get a thumbs up from Thomas. And then I guess I don't want to play with my browser tools to create it, but we would want some sort of summary text, I guess, between the label and the option. Um, and so let's see, just for some concrete suggestions, let's go back to the spreadsheet. And for content, um, link to other,
Wait,
yes?
move it one row underneath, because the pattern was basically in row 71, it would be the suggestion if the label for the field type would change. So move it to the row
Okay,
underneath.
link to other content such as basic page or article using the content types provided by core. And for, whoops, there we go. Attach a term from any vocabulary. So, all right. So column A. Thank you. Did you just paste that in?
Yeah.
Thanks. So that's the existing text, and
Yeah, exactly.
and we'll move something like that to a summary where it's outside the list of options. And then I really want to get the word vocabulary into here. And if we were to add custom block type, or if we were to add content block rather, then I would want to have block type in here. So those are just some concrete suggestions to get us started. But Thomas, do you want to?
I was going to concur with the way you've approached those that sample text. I think that's definitely a step in the right direction, and I think it would help to see maybe one or two of the additional references. Like I think it was block type that you mentioned, but if we could add those additional references and indicate that they would be new, it would be helpful for me. But I agree with that. I think as well as the change to other needs to be noted here. I don't, I think that it sounds like no one is advocating for removing these options at this point. Is that a safe assumption? Or should we continue to discuss that?
I don't think that we should remove any options. You're getting a thumbs up from Ralph as well.
Okay. That for me, that I think that's these are the small steps that help remove this problem was real like this section's was too big for me to think about. If we can get rid of the remove option, if that's not what we're talking about, if we can indicate that we might change other here, and then continue what you've done. I The only thing I was wondering is whether or not we need like link to other content, or it could just be link to content such as, um, or even link to content period, examples, basic page, article, to do the pattern from above. But this is what I'm looking for. I like your suggestions.
And Benji,
Yes.
could you please complete the description for any? Because you've switched the screen and I was only halfway through typing what you've had. I've only choose from all available options, but it was a little bit more.
Um,
On the next screen. Okay. Thank you.
you're welcome. So let's see, just looking at the text we have here, we're being inconsistent in our verbs. There's link to other content, attach term from a vocabulary. And that's a choice, not necessarily the right choice. Sometimes in the name of consistency, we end up repeating the same boilerplate text many times, and that's not good either. But maybe this is a case where we should be more consistent. I'm not sure. Go ahead, Ralph.
Just one remark about the description for the taxonomy term. I liked Thomas's suggestion to add the concept of tag, or just name it alongside term, because I'm not sure if term rings a bell for everyone in the context of vocabulary, and tag is something someone is scanning for. So, but others are looking for term. So yeah, tag or term might be the best. Yeah.
And Simo in the chat says that attach suggests embed, not link to him. Which I'm not sure that that's a bad thing, because when you have a term reference on a field, you by default you just get links to the term pages, but you could also embed it. It's all depends on how you choose to build your page, your view mode technically. But Thomas, go ahead.
I like your approach of less is more, and I've heard the term link used as a verb. So if we want attach a tag, we can say link content such as basic page or article, and I think it follows the pattern, avoids repetition, is shorter, and gets the information across. So we can lose two words.
We'll just strike these two words.
Yeah.
Oops. I'm not sure I want to strike two. Link to content, link content. No, can always change it later.
And following that pattern, could then the A in taxonomy term also be striked, meaning attach tag or term from any vocabulary?
I don't think so.
Okay.
And what can we say about user? What's a common use case for a user reference? And should we use link or attach? Should we use something else? Refer. Maybe we should always be using the word refer since it's an entity reference. You know, on the site, I don't know if that's helpful. Go ahead, Ralph.
Just one question. At the moment, those descriptions describe what each option is doing, but circling back to Thomas's point, would it make sense to also add some sort of reasoning when and why you choose one of the given options?
Yeah, I was thinking of the same thing. We should add some use cases here. You know,
For
less
users.
less is
Mm.
more does not mean that you should not give additional information.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Simo, I cut you off.
Yeah. So for users, it might be like a use case might be if the site wants to expose users' email address in a content page or something like that. So expose post like showing some of the user fields on on a content page. So for that kind of things, it could be used. But the reference could go via author, but kind of if it would be some kind of a more than a single author, that could be like communicated with user reference. Not very kind of a good example maybe, but it's at least an example.
I don't want the email address to be the only example we give, or
Yeah.
because for privacy reasons, that's often not an option that people should use.
Or it could be something like those like maintainers of a module. So they are users, and they are somehow referenced on a node page. How would you describe that?
Do I have to say, for examples, that I don't mean to limit what you can do with user reference to these two things? Go ahead, Ralph.
For one, I would move the second sentence into a new row. So we keep to the bulleted list approach. And second, I wonder if it would make sense to, aside that example, also explain the implication, meaning that by referencing, you make basically the fields of the user entity available within the current content type or in the current field that way by referencing it. Something like that, that it becomes more clear, but not sure how it would be possible to communicate it in a concise, short way.
Something like that. And if we are going to stick with the bulleted list, then example related articles, next steps, is that?
What does next steps mean? That
If
context.
your content type is some sort of instructions, then there's often a next and previous links. Would that be more generic? Something like that. Thomas?
I was wondering if we could take a look at something like user, go a little bit deeper, because I think we could come up with some good examples if we were looking at what from content we can reference, what from the taxonomy term that might make coming up with the examples simpler on us, or if that's just too much work for today.
We only have a few more minutes left, so if you can make a sort of a concrete suggestion, I think that would be most useful at the moment.
I mean, in place of email address, I think, I just don't recall, and I don't have a site in front of me. You could use something like user description rather than user email. Or I seem to recall that there was a reference to whether or not users have accepted the account, like after you've sent it out, whether they've actually logged in, but you could do some of that kind of information. I just don't know I don't know what's available through that field reference, through the content reference.
So coming up with better use cases is certainly something to think about, but let's at least in the last few minutes we have come up with some use cases for taxonomy terms. That shouldn't be too hard. Um, Article type, location, what are the common uses for taxonomy? Go ahead, Ralph.
How about use the verb tag in the example, and that way we could strike it in the description itself, and that way you still are
Okay.
able to make the connections that way.
So a free tag. And let's say examples. Free tag. Umami uses taxonomy for recipes, doesn't it?
Categorization, which is basically tagging, but
yeah. Site section or you have a bunch of articles. What do you typically call it? Topic?
yeah.
Maybe call it article topic.
Article topic? Okay. We are at the end of the hour. Of course, there's room for improvement. I think this is a good start. This would certainly be an improvement over repeating the same text 4 times. We still want to come up with some text that applies to all of the options. And this I think does a better job of telling people when they'd want to use each option. Any other last words?
Maybe add and think about at least 1 or 2 more options to add to the current list.
Okay. Yeah, if you think in the next week of whatever site you're working on, what entity references you're using, are you using anything other than taxonomy and content? I agree that the goal should be that people never use the other option, in my opinion. Okay, thanks all for working on that, and I guess we'll probably continue this next week as well.
Thank you, Benji. I know this is painful, but thank you, thank you. It's very important.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.